stream, please.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. Welcome everybody to this afternoon's Angus IJB. I hope everybody's well. It's nice to see you all. I know it's a busy day for many of you in the meeting today, with community planning partnership workshops and audit committees. So we'll plan to get through in good time this afternoon, and depending on how we get on, we may have a short break in between as well, but we'll see how we move through the agenda. So we'll just move straight on with the meeting, and we'll start with apologies. Do we have any apologies, Karen?
Chair, we have apologies from Sarah Dickey and Nikki Worrell. They are actually in another meeting, but they may be able to join the meeting later on. And apologies from David Coulson and Gillian Galloway today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. And any declarations of interest? Do we have any declarations of interest? Don't see any hands up. No. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 3 now, which is minutes including action log, and we go to 3A, which is the minute of the previous meeting, which was the 22nd of June. Trust you have all had a chance to look through that. Do we have any comments on that minute? No. Are we all happy to approve that as a true record of that meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And we'll move on to 3B now, which is the action log. Gail, will I hand over to you for that one?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We're progressing with most of the actions. In fact, you'll see in the report, many of them are complete. If I could draw your attention to page 21 in your bundle, and the outstanding 2 actions from December 2 years ago regarding, well, the first one regarding mental health and well-being. I can confirm that there is significant progress being taken regarding mental health. We had a meeting on Monday, a very high-level meeting, which was attended by a number of us, including the chief officers, the director of nursing, chief finance officer, and that was to review the final report for the independent oversight and assurance group for mental health services in Tayside. A further discussion is planned with the chief finance officer from the partnership, the director of finance in NHS Tayside, and the chief officers, ideally within the next 2 weeks, to progress the financial element there. So significant progress is being made.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Gail, and thanks for that verbal update as well. And it's good to hear around that progress that's been made. Julie?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask on page 22 on those 2 red items, it says Chief Officer brackets interim. Is that fair? And is that still an interim arrangement?
No, I think that's process. Julie, I was interim in December 2020.
Well spotted, Julie. And George?
Thanks, Imogen. Yeah, it was just to say the Gables replacement, we don't have a date set against that. We were discussing that at the Care Home Review last week. It meets very regularly. There are still some pretty significant engagement and commissioning elements to the work to be progressed, and I had hoped we would be able to accelerate that process a bit and bring a report to October, but it doesn't look like that's feasible, and we'll bring a report to the December the 7th meeting.
Okay, thanks for that update, George. Does anybody have...
The last item that's still in red as overdue, you'll see on the actions that's due to come to our October IJB. That's the Angus IJB Strategic Financial Plan update.
Thanks. Peter?
Yes, thanks, Jane. I noticed when you come back to page 18, item 8, Strategic Planning Update, it says that it's on target, but it doesn't say what the target is.
That's on the agenda today, Peter, there's a report on the agenda today.
Okay.
I've said not. I would like to, Sally, I don't know if Sally's in the meeting, but I want to say it's 2023.
Oh, right, that's that one. Okay. All right, thank you.
George? You're on mute.
Sorry, there's an agenda note about the strategic plan slightly further on in the agenda, and I can say a bit more about that when we get to it, if you like.
Okay, any other questions or comments on the action log? No, we're all happy to note that then. Great, thank you. And we'll move on to item 3C, which is the minute of the audit committee, which was held on the 22nd of June. Are we all happy to note those minutes? Yep. Okay, thank you. And we'll move on now in the agenda item 4, which is an agenda note on the strategic commissioning plan, which we've just been talking about, 2023-26, and there's information contained within that agenda note. George, is this the one that you wanted to say a bit more about them?
Yeah, thanks, Emma-Jane. Just to say that in addition to the agenda note, members should all have received a copy of a briefing about the strategic plan and the work that we're doing on it and where we've got to with that work, and that includes a timeline and also the it's mentioned in the agenda note as well. There'll be a special session with the IGB in November. We haven't fixed a date yet. It depends on some of the other bits of the plan all fitting together, but we will soon come back with a date for a session with the IGB members in November time.
Thanks for that. Any comments, questions on that one? We're happy to note that information. Yep. Okay, thanks very much. Moving on now in the agenda to item 5, which is the review of standing orders. This is relating to the Audit Committee and Strategic Planning Group. Sandy, is this your one?
Yes, Chair, I'll quickly deal with this. Members will remember that at the June meeting, we had a review of the standing orders of the main IGB, the meeting we're in right now. The Audit Committee had already, earlier on in this calendar year, considered some recommendations for improving the Audit Committee's terms of reference, but we didn't want to bring it to the last meeting because there was just too much going on. So that's it brought to this meeting. The main contents that set out in section 3, things like formalising a private meeting with members, between members of the Audit Committee and our auditors, formalising annual reports. Some of this stuff is already in place. The receipt of annual reports on the agenda today. As it happens, we had our annual meeting, private meeting with our auditors earlier on today as well. But this is really just, I'd like to think, a refresh and update of the Audit Committee's standing orders, and hopefully people are okay with that. And then we've taken the opportunity to bring in the strategic planning group comment, which again just kind of reflects where we are. So hopefully this feels like a natural tidy up, refreshing for everybody.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Do we have any comments or questions on this one? No. George?
Just to highlight that we took some legal advice about whether or not the strategic planning group's existence needed to be noted in the standing orders, and they said that it did need to be, but we just absorbed that into this report, just to highlight that for people.
Thanks for that. Julie?
Yeah, I just wanted to chip in that the additional section on hosting a non-binding indicative vote has garnered quite a bit of interest within the Vice Chair and Chair network. So, they're really keen on increasing democracy and are very hopeful that the service will take that into account. But I think we have been at the leading edge of this. So I've shared it with that network following a meeting about the National Care Service, and feedback has been so always happy to share good practice from Angus.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for that, Julie. Thank you. And Gail?
Yes, Chair, I can also confirm I've had inquiries about that as well.
Okay, so Angus is making waves in a good way, hopefully. That's great. Thanks very much. Any other questions or comments before we move to the recommendations on this one? No. Well, you'll all see 4 recommendations there. I'll not read them all out, including the last one, which is to approve the attached revised IGB standing orders. So are we all happy with those recommendations? Yep. Okay, thanks very much. And thanks, Sandy. And we will move on now to item 6, which is the directions, policy and procedure. Sorry, I'm just flicking through my notes to get to it. So who's taking this one, Gail? Sandy again?
Sandy again, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Gail. Yeah, I mean, again, hopefully this is self-explanatory. We've spoken before about the government policy or the government directive to improve the use of directions. And we know that as an IGB, we were probably historically an underuser of directions. We've seen them more in our papers over the last 18 months, particularly in the last probably 9 months or so. And this is really trying to formalise what we need to be doing going forward. It includes things like creating a register of directions and the monitoring function of those directions. So it's trying to do a number of things, and hopefully everybody feels this formalises the kind of direction or the path that we've been on for the last 18 months or so. I would just note 2 things, Chair. One, while we have just spoken about the Audit Committee's remit on the item before, this actually broadens the Audit Committee's remit very slightly because it includes reference to the monitoring of directions going through the Audit Committee. So once this is approved, that will become another function of the Audit Committee. And also, I think the following point would be a helpful additional kind of recommendation to note. We know since we drafted and put this together that we've advice from our internal auditors to clarify the clinical and care governance aspect of directions. We haven't managed to do that yet, but we do intend to do that. And in discussion with Alison Clement, I'm not sure if Alison's on the call yet, but in discussion with Alison, we felt the best thing to do was to get this approved, this version approved, so it exists and it's live, and then come back to the IGB maybe in December with an update to capture the issue that we need to deal with regarding care governance and how that would be featuring in directions. So hopefully we can maybe include that as an additional recommendation to come back to the IGB in December with a review of this to capture clinical and care governance issues. But otherwise, obviously, myself and Gail happy to take any questions.
That's great. Thanks for that, Sandy. And I think that's a good idea in terms of additional recommendation. Catherine.
Thank you. Firstly, just to welcome the clarity of this report. I think it's really helpful, and the appendix setting out in a kind of more accessible format what that looks like was really useful to make some sense of what's been looked at. Also, with my role in terms of the audit committee, I welcome the role around the scrutiny kind of oversight of that going forward, which I think will be helpful. I did wonder whether or not it may be made more explicit in Appendix A what and where the engagement with NHS, Tayside and Angus Council is in the process of developing any directions. And that touches in part on the point that Sandy was just making there around clinical care governance elements, because obviously with my Chief Social Work Officer hat on, there would be a particular role there to perhaps provide advice and or scrutiny around what was being proposed as a direction on behalf of the council. But I reckon there are probably other key parties that would want to be formally consulted in advance of directions being issued. And at the moment, although there's repeated reference to that through the document itself, it doesn't actually say at any point in the flowchart when or how that might happen. And I think firming up on that might be quite helpful in advance of implementation. But those were just kind of observations from my perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Catherine. And just now wait till some of the other questions.
Well, I tell you, possibly better to respond, although I see Gail's got her hand up and I don't want to contradict what Gail was about to say. But at the risk of doing that, Catherine, totally take your point on board. We'll go and have a look at that to make sure we're reading it through and looking at the references. Just as you were describing it, I wonder, and it's just a possibility, if that role of involving NHS Tay Angus Council is almost implicit in the development of a report. But what doesn't matter, we'll go back and have a look at that to see, if we need to firm all that up in a potential revision to this.
That's really helpful. I think it's the informality of that at the moment that probably needs to be sharpened up in terms of the flowchart. And where I would have seen that sitting is somewhere between EMT and IJB, probably in the green section of the flowchart, if that helps at all.
Okay, thanks for that. Peter.
Yeah, thanks. Just a minor point, or 2 points. One is at the very top of page 51, there's a very minor typo about the brackets around Angus Council. And the second point, slightly more important, given the increased remit of the audit committee, there is no mention in here of a register being maintained, and I think it should be, if it isn't going to be, so that the audit committee can review that register at regular intervals.
Okay, thanks for that, Peter. Sandy, do you want to respond to that, or?
Sorry, again, I know Gail's got a hand up. We might want to come to her if she wants to reply to any of these, but again, we'll take that point on board, Peter. The monitoring of it will be dependent on a register. So I think, again, if we've not kind of, much the same as Catherine said, if we've not crystallised that enough in the narrative, we'll formalise it enough, we'll take that on board and see if we can build that in.
Okay, sorry, Gail, I didn't see your hand was up there. Gail, do you want to come in just now?
That's quite all right, Chair. Sandy's doing an excellent job of reading my mind there. There is actually a register kept, so apologies that that's not noted in the report. So yes, you're absolutely right, Peter. We'll ensure that that's noted. And Catherine, yes, I'll take your points there, and I'll speak to Sally Wilson around how we can tidy that schematic in Appendix A.
Okay, and Alison.
Thank you, Sandy, for the additional recommendation. I'm very supportive of that. I think we do need to have the clinical governance arrangements explicit. And I had a query very similar to Catherine's about how we go about co-producing and working alongside NHS Tayside to produce the directions. I do have some concerns about the practicalities of this, around which would be the specific forums that we would use to co-produce, and this is really with a sort of clinical engagement, clinical advisory hat on, around how we get the pathways, the right clinical evidence to then co-produce. It's very difficult at the moment to delineate within NHS Tayside what is a delegated function that we would be able to issue directions on and what isn't. And that is around the resources around workforce and finance. And so I'm just wondering if we're coming back in December, if we could be a bit more explicit around that co-production element. How would we do that, and what's in scope and what isn't, so that it's very clear for everybody. At the moment, I'm seeing difficulties into how we would go about starting off the process of co-production when we are not absolutely clear what's in and out of scope.
Thanks for that, Alison. Andrew.
Hi, Jane. Thank you very much. I too welcome the introduction of the policy on directions, whereas before it was kind of perceived as a blunt instrument and a weapon of last resort. It's nice to see that we're now going to be using it as a management tool, and I'm particularly interested to see how well the directions register will work. I think it's a very, very efficient way of keeping track of commitments and promises, especially for people who maybe missed a meeting or something like that. It's nicely encapsulated in one kind of document. So I look forward to seeing how it works in practice. It seems on the surface it looks as if it's a very practical and workable process, but it's very, very clear. So all in favour of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And Julie.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I would reiterate what Andrew says. But I just wanted to pick up on Alison's point around defining those areas. I guess if there are grey areas that need to be further bottomed out, how do you see that happening? Is that a kind of an addendum to the integration scheme, or an appendix perhaps around a memo of understanding around who does what, if that's not clear at the moment?
So my thoughts are, for example, some urgent care and some aspects will be around planned care, and that it's not clear somebody that works for in a particular area of the hospital, and it would be very easy for people to move in and out of scope, if you like. So it's just really about having a clear idea for me as to our delegated areas, what they are, and not saying half of a person is this and half of a person is that, but just an idea, and then agreeing the forums that we would have these discussions. So for me, if it was something related to urgent care, it would be through the Unscheduled Care Board of NHS Tayside. If it was something related to planned care and outpatients, it would probably be through the Planned Care Board. And if it was something related to mental health, it would be through the mental health boards that there are. And if it's something related to prescribing, it would be Tayside Prescribing Management Group. But at the moment, it's we're not producing directions through these groups. It's very much on short-term funding and short-term projects, tested change and agreements and goodwill. I think could get quite messy if we try and delineate. So it would be good to know what's in and out of scope beforehand.
Thanks, that was helpful.
And Sandy?
Maybe with hindsight, I shouldn't put my hand up, but Alison's just given us a very good list of examples of places we can go. And I suppose when I originally put my hand up, I was thinking about the direction policy, and we just have to be careful about getting this balance of examples that are current, because Alison's given us a good list there, but making sure that this general point of co-producing with the right parts of systems, which can sometimes change and evolve, we're just going to have to get the balance of that right. But either way, the point is a really quite a good one, and we'll make sure, given that we've got an opportunity of coming back in December, we'll try and wrap this one up.
And Gail?
Yes, I would agree. I can also confirm that the NHS Board Medical Director is also looking at this. She's relatively new in post, and she's looking at the co-production and some of the groups and where they report and the governance. So that's also been highlighted as well.
Thanks, Gail. That's helpful. And Elaine?
It's just really developing on from that. I wonder if perhaps recognise that they've been done in kind of short-term money, whether perhaps using some of the directions that have been produced and scoping out where they would best lie. So who would they be co-produced with? So perhaps they've been done by a service or ad hoc or through short-term funding. Who should they have been co-produced with? Because that will, I think, probably then inform how that governance reporting is. Because most of the structures, like either the Planned Care Board, which is an overarching group of services working together, but it may then inform how that would report. And it may actually be really useful just to almost retrospectively look how things were done, and that might inform some of the ways it should be done going forward. And that just might be a way of not quite stress testing it, but almost a kind of tabletop exercise of how this could work in the future by road testing a few that have been done. It may just be a way of kind of speeding up how to get it done for December.
Great, thanks for that, Elaine. I think that's a good suggestion, and as you've highlighted, we've got a bit of time as well in terms of between now and December with coming back with the revisions. So that sounds like a worthwhile exercise. Any other questions or comments on this one? No. Okay. Well, you'll see that in the recommendations are we happy to approve the directions, policy and procedure, and we've also got that additional recommendation as highlighted by Sandy at the start in terms of coming back in December with some revisions. And are we all happy with both of those recommendations then? Yep. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much, everybody. And we'll move on now to agenda item 7, which is the Equalities Mainstreaming Report. And I think this is George, isn't it?
It is, yes, Imogen. Yeah, thank you. Can I just extend my thanks to Morgan Lowe, first of all, who's a senior planning officer in the improvement and development team. Morgan's done a lot of work report, and she's on the call today in case there are some more detailed questions than I can answer. So thanks, Morgan. The mainstreaming report was considered at the strategic planning group on the 3rd of August as well. So for people who aren't familiar with this area of activity, the Equality Act in 2010 placed duties on public bodies to publish a set of equality outcomes every 4 years and produce a progress report describing how well they are achieving those outcomes at least every 2 years. An equalities mainstream report has to be published every 2 years. Respondents from EHRC advising us that we were not compliant with these duties, and that was almost entirely because of the pandemic and our commitment to doing other things at the time, and we hadn't managed to keep the ball rolling on these issues, and they are pretty important, so it was right that we were chased up about that. So the message was fairly straightforward: get it done, and get it done pretty quickly. So we did knuckle right down and get on with that. So where we were short was a new equalities mainstreaming report was due to be published in 2020, and we hadn't published one since 2018. A new set of equalities outcomes was due to be published in 2022, and a progress report on the 2018 equality outcomes was due to be published in 2020. So again, we hadn't done that because in 2020, of course, we got completely absorbed into the pandemic work. Equality impact assessments weren't in place for all.
Well, you've gone on mute, George.
Sorry, I don't know what happened there. So I was just saying equality impact assessments weren't in place for all our policies and practices, and we needed to make sure that one was in place, the new strategic plan. So we've been working pretty hard on this. One of the things that's meant to happen is you're supposed to carry out a specific public engagement for the equalities mainstreaming report. The time frame that we were given to complete the work, and we did use our existing consultation and engagement materials. Everybody in the IJB will know we've carried out a broad range of consultation and engagement in the last few years over a range of topics. So we did use that specific engagement session, a comprehensive one for the equalities mainstreaming report, which is due in 2024. So we have another chance to do that. Attached to the plans that I've referred to for people's information and consideration, our next steps would be to carry out the additional actions regarding the completion of the equalities impact assessments and the Fairer Scotland duty assessments to make sure they're being carried out correctly. That'll involve some additional staff training on equalities. We'll establish an equality working group to ensure progress is made on the equality outcomes and to assist with the development of the future mainstreaming reports. And that group will include service user and carer representation. So I would commend the reports to you. I think they're thorough and good. They make up the ground that we have lost, so we've still some other work to do, and it is an important area, and the reports are all attached as appendices. I'm just wondering if Morgan wants to add anything to what I've said. Morgan, do you want to?
The only other thing I would add is just to say that, we have refreshed the existing equality outcomes, but by doing that, we've updated the measures to make sure that they are relevant and current. And also, I've added a new equality outcome there, reflecting our commitment to promoting an equality-driven culture within the organisation, which I think is a really important addition as well.
Thanks, Morgan.
Okay, thanks very much, both of you, for that. So, as you were saying, George, we haven't been fully compliant, so it's timely, obviously, that we have this report now. questions and comments? I see a few hands up. Lois.
I think maybe Andrew was maybe before me.
Oh, sorry, I'm just seeing how they come up.
Yeah, it's just a very quick question. I understand that, you know, obviously there's been trouble with getting people to focus on anything else but COVID over the last 2 years, and that's perfectly understandable. And essentially this is catching up. Is there any indication from the engagement that we've had, indirectly or directly, that there is actually an issue with equalities in any kind of aspect within Angus IJB, or is this really just catching up with deadlines or milestones that we've missed in reporting back? And in other words, in not reporting back, have we left ourselves exposed to missing equalities issues, or is it? I mean, it doesn't. I can't get a scale of what the issue is. Is it just a clerical exercise, or is there an underlying equalities issue that we might have missed because we haven't done this work? Basically, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, a good question, Andrew. I mean, I would put it like this. I think that we were probably, I don't know, 70% tuned into equalities issues as an organisation, and we want to be 95% tuned into it. I don't think we've had any glaring omissions when we bring strategic planning reports. We always have equalities impact assessments with those, but I think the quality of those can be improved. So it's just our awareness across the board as an organisation, probably, and our skill set that need to be a bit better. But I don't think we've had any major gaffes or omissions as a result of that.
Okay, thanks for that. Lois?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, George. Thanks, Morgan. I do appreciate that, you know, there's a lot of work gone into this, and you know, it's not the only thing that you'll have to do in a day or a week or over the last month or so. So I really do appreciate that. However, I'm concerned about this report and whether it's ready. I do feel that there's a wealth of information missing in terms of inequalities and those with protected characteristics, and key bits of information that could be in there, as well as our outcomes as well, and just kind of a robust commitment to really tackle and reduce inequalities within Angus. It's just not coming through kind of robustly enough to me. I don't want to take up all the time here, but I can just give some examples. So, you know, just in terms of, I appreciate it was just a snapshot of services that the Health and Social Care Partnership provide and deliver, you know, and there's reference to those and reference to plans and reviews, but there's no reference, for example, to housing support and aids and adaptations, which I think is hugely important in terms to the links with housing and health inequalities. And as we speak, as far as I'm aware, the Health and Social Care Partnership has taken on much more housing responsibilities. There's no reference in terms of refugees. There just feels to be, you know, bit groups missing. There's a list of medical conditions and percentages. However, there are many more kind of physical disabilities, people with sensory impairments, learning disability and autism. There's little reference there. I feel that there's a strong focus on service delivery, which of course is hugely important. However, I would be hoping and expecting to see within our outcomes a much kind of more bolder statement in terms of, you know, what we're going to do to reduce inequalities. I think that should be a clear aim or aspiration. I think there's kind of areas such as hate incidents and discrimination that could have been touched on, tackling stigma. I just feel that there's more that could go in there. I know it's difficult when you're putting a report together as to what you put in and what you don't, but I think there's, like I say, information that should be there. In terms of like our comms and engagement, it's still very heavily focused and worded around online methods. And I appreciate that that's the direction of travel. However, it still doesn't, for me, recognise that there are many of residents within Angus, especially older people, where there is still, digital exclusion, and they're not able to access information online in that way. So, yeah, that's my thoughts.
Thanks for that, Lois. I don't know, does anybody want to respond, or will we just keep going in terms of what some of the feedback from some of the other IJB members have got as well? George, was that a hand up to say you wanted to respond?
Yeah, it's helpful to get some detailed feedback, Lois, and we can quite easily. I would say, though, that the policy is not intended to be an exhaustive list of services, more illustrative, because we could go into huge detail about every service and what every service wants to do, or the approach that would be taken. So I don't think we would want to do that. It would just make the report far too big. But maybe we need a few other examples. And I take your point about the new homelessness duties that we have, or we will be getting. Then we should probably cover that, and if we, maybe a bit more on aids and adaptations. Of course, we are really meant to confine ourselves to protected characteristics, the listed set of protected characteristics. I think, Morgan, that would be the case, and that those are the areas we're required to cover. But that's just my initial response. Morgan, do you want to? Have you got anything to add?
The only other thing I would add is obviously that the situation that we're in at the moment with non-compliance means that the report that we have put forward is achievable, because we know that obviously the Equality and Human Rights Commission will be focused on our improvements in this area. So we really wanted to pull together something that we knew we could focus on in the next 2 years that would be achievable. There's obviously so much more to do in this area, and we absolutely recognise that. But I think it's important to, first of all, become compliant with the legislation, ensure we've got publications in place and we've got a clear action plan to work towards. But absolutely, I appreciate that there are more things that we need to do in future and that could be added in to the report.
I suppose the question is, do we do some of that now, or does some of that have to wait till we do a kind of fuller engagement process for the 2024 report?
It's also worth noting that the reporting structure and timeframes from around this is about to change next year. So we may be required to do a new equalities mainstreaming report and set of equality outcomes next year, potentially. We're waiting on the confirmation of the new timeframe for all public bodies.
Okay, thanks for that. We'll maybe come back to this point whenever we are considering the recommendations at the end, but keen to hear some others' views, excuse me, as well. Julie.
Thank you, Emma Jane. Yeah, I particularly wanted to pick up on, I think, on what Lois led into there around young people and LGBT and Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. And not solely people who are using our services, but around what people would hope that they would meet do need our services. And I think a lot of that is about getting a sense of the barriers that people face and cultural sensitivities perhaps as well. People are often put off accessing services because of a perceived barrier in place, and we'd want to, I think, engage with people really early in order to truly co-produce with them and not simply fix things that aren't working well for people. General point, and also, I mean, there are lots of groups available across Angus and new ones popping up all the time that would be good routes into getting that really deep engagement with people. Thank you.
Thank you. And Catherine?
Thanks for the opportunity to come in on this. I thought it was a really helpful report. I think it's a good place to start in terms of taking us from a position of not having something in place to incrementally getting to where we all collectively think we want to be on this particular issue and topic. And there are absolutely huge cross-cutting interdependencies here. I did think that it would be particularly helpful for working towards the 2024 development of the plan to give some thought and consideration as to how colleagues will engage specifically with children and young people, particularly around UNCRC incorporation, and how we make sure that as users of health and social care services, albeit that children's social work is not delegated to this IGB, nevertheless they are users of a wide range of services that the IGB has responsibility for. So it would be quite good to be able to quite clearly point to the engagement with that particular group of our population. And the other aspect that I thought we might want to give some particular thought to in future consultation is the issue of rurality and accessibility of services, from that lens as well. But again, these are kind of observations as to how we might develop our engagement strategy for the next report. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. And Chris?
Yep, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Chair, for the possibility of the opportunity to ask a couple of questions. I was just looking on section 3 on the current position on page 60, and it talks about additional staff training will be provided on equalities. I was wondering what the situation was actually on current staff equality training. I mean, but the remittance obviously is that everyone's pretty much a couple of years behind on delivering things that were not non-COVID and pandemic related. So I was wondering whether that perhaps actually needs rephrased to either new or extra or refresher staff training, given the length of time it may have elapsed since staff were last trained on the issues of equalities. The other question I had was around that staff training. Now, obviously, there's private contractors who deliver services on behalf of the Health and Social Care Partnership. Does that equalities training include staff that are delivering and organisations that are delivering services on behalf of the Health and Social Care Partnership? But it's just a couple of queries there around what happens currently, what can potentially happen, and the extent to which that training would be offered and delivered. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I don't know, has anybody got some answers for Chris's question?
I could respond to that. It's just to say that there is currently online training available for all staff on equalities, which is kept up to date. It's updated constantly, and the idea is, though, that we need additional training specifically around the completion of equality impact assessments in particular. We've identified that that is the area where staff are looking for more information and more support. And that is the intended goal of the training, is to provide a bit more in-depth training on how staff go about completing those assessments, as that was one of the recommendations coming from the Equality and Human Rights Commission, was around our completion of EQIE assessments. That will be only for partnership staff, both health and council partnership staff, who would complete EQIE assessments for us, and that training will be delivered in-house by myself and the Angus Council Equalities Officer, and with colleagues in NHS Tayside as well.
Okay. And Elaine.
Yeah, I think I really welcome the document. I think it's great to see this written down, but I suppose it's just a thought about being really aspirational about where we want to be. And I think it is that bit about being conscious too that we all personally and as systems have blind spots. And it is perhaps really being kind of conscious to those, and really, I think, thinking about the values and behaviours that we we want to describe, we want to live by, and we want our services to hold. And it's probably just really, is there some opportunity there to think about how we want to be, how we want to behave, how we want to welcome people? And I think really, reckon Councillor Speed's comments there, I think they were really valuable about the description of Angus and who we are by our background, but it's really to aspire and to want to be a place where we welcome everybody. And I'm just thinking about that comment about the refugees as well, about we want to be a place where people can come and we are supportive. And it's just perhaps being very conscious that although we may describe this, and this is what we may hope for, this may not be the experience of many people coming into Angus. And it really is just perhaps being aware that although these are the values we describe, they may not, through either conscious or subconscious behaviour, and just maybe some thought about how do we capture those gaps, how do we rapidly address those, and just to be open to, although we think that we are unbiased, we know that we're not, and sometimes we blind spots can be
breaking up a bit, Elaine. I don't know if that's for everybody else as well, but yeah, we caught the first part, but just the last sort of minute or so we didn't catch that.
It's perhaps that ask that are open sometimes to our conscious and unconscious spots.
Yeah, I think we've lost her. Possibly.
Elaine, it's Karen here. I'm just wondering if it would help you were to turn your camera off. Sometimes that helps in terms of connection, so that we can probably hear a little bit clearer.
Is that better?
Yes, it does.
That's better.
Yep.
Each time I do it, I'm getting briefer. So it really is an ask, perhaps, that we describe that we know that we sometimes have blind spots to the values that we hold, but we may not always deliver them, or the experience that others may not experience them as we think we're delivering them. And it probably is just an ask, and I think it's really echoing Councillor Steed's comments about something to be aspirational and to really look at the experience of some people coming into our communities. They may not be what we think we're delivering, and it's just being open to that and perhaps having that opportunity and that express wish that we will grow and develop and get better. Third time lucky.
Thank you. We got all of that, absolutely. Thanks, Elaine. Okay, Councillor Meakin.
Mine's is just a comment, really. I welcome the report. I think it's a very good start, a good basis to move forward. There are omissions, I think, in the report, but I think we've got some time now to maybe carry out a fuller engagement, which we weren't able to do for this one. And hopefully, when we do the next iteration, it'll be even better than this one. That's all.
Thank you. And George?
Yeah, I agree with just about everything that's been said. I do think, though, what's required in this instance, because we have to become compliant or we're going to find ourselves in real difficulties. And I think the time for us to be more aspirational is after we are compliant. And that might sound a bit minimalist, and I am into, being aspirational in these things. But I think there is a task for us that we have to. And I would also say that, we do have to recognise the limitations on what we're required to do. So, and it has to be tied really to the terms of the Equalities Act, and it describes there the protected characteristics, talking about age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnerships, pregnancy and maternity, ethnicity, religion and belief, sex and sexual orientation. So, ethnicity, probably, if we take it in its broadest sense, will cover refugees and so on. Refugees are not named as a protected characteristic. And then says the things we were prohibited from. We're prohibited from direct discrimination, failure to make reasonable adjustments for people with a disability, indirect discrimination, discrimination by perception. And what I was thinking about when Elaine was speaking was things like confirming biases, if you like, discrimination by association, harassment and victimisation. Those are the things we have to demonstrate. And we said in the report that we've stayed with the same equality outcomes, and they might change for the 2024 version, but they still seemed fit for purpose. So those were: we will make all services accessible to meet the needs of people with a protected characteristic, to allow them to be as independent as possible. People with protected characteristics and equality groups are able to make informed choices so that they have control over their own lives. People with protected characteristics will be involved in their own care to allow them access to services that meet their physical, cultural, religious and equality needs. Angus Health and Social Care Partnership will promote an equality-driven culture within the organisation. And they're by necessity quite broad brushstroke things, but I don't think we would take issue with those. And if we did want to change them, I think that would need to be part of a bigger engagement exercise. We might make them a bit more sophisticated and a bit, because we've learned more as we've gone along. So for me, there is a bit about, I think we've got the pragmatic task of making ourselves compliant. I don't know what happens if we don't do that, but I don't think it would be good. And then I think the time for building something that's a bit more substantial and a bit more layered probably comes after that. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, George. So I'm going to bring in Lois, and then I'll let Gail have the last kind of word on this one. Lois?
Yeah, it was just on that in terms of, understand that, we need to become compliant. And I just wondered, is that time sensitive? Is there a kind of deadline for having this report completed? Yeah. Well, I know there will be a deadline, but is it quite close? Are we almost there?
I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. Morgan, do you know?
Yeah, we made a commitment to the EHRC that we would have the report come to October IGB at the latest. So we are, it's a very tight time scale.
Okay. I think, like I said, I appreciate that there's lots of information that could have gone in, but I think what concerns me is around just perhaps those protected characteristics and some of the key bits of information that could have gone alongside demonstrating our understanding and the impacts and the experiences of those with protected characteristic, what the barriers and challenges are. I think that just doesn't come through enough for me. But I think, like's been said, certainly would hope to see that coming in time. I think that's crucial, that there's more goes into that, and that engagement with those groups take place, or individuals and groups take place.
Thanks for that. And Gail?
Yes, I'm listening, Chair, to everything people are saying and actually agreeing. But I think we should have had this done, and it was due to be published in Twitter. So I think the team have done a tremendous job at this stage. There is risks if we are not compliant with this, and I really don't feel that we want to be in that position. What I can do is assure the committee that all future mainstreaming reports will absolutely be drafted following dedicated public engagement to inform, as Lois is saying, the outcomes and protected characteristics and the actions, and probably being more aspirational, as others have said. I do wonder, Morgan, if there's some way of capturing some of what Elaine and Lois is saying in the foreword. If we could maybe do some of that and describe it in a bit of detail. Morgan's nodding there, Chair. I think, Lois, we might be in consultation with you, and apologies, Elaine, you were breaking up, so I wasn't capturing all of what you said, but I think there's possibly a way of capturing that in the foreword for us.
That sounds good. Lois?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's any way, if this has to be kind of agreed today so that it can be submitted and so that the partnership becomes compliant, is there any way that can be done, but then rather than wait, when would it next be being reviewed? Is there any way that could kind of be done sooner, bearing in mind kind of the comments that have, and concerns that have been raised today, so that it, you know, because time's obviously been tight for getting this done, which when you're having to rush to do something, it would maybe then allow time then for more information and kind of the outcomes to be kind of
Morgan
and slightly.
It's just to say that, you know, the timescales for reporting are due to change, and we are expecting that we may be asked to submit a mainstreaming report potentially next year. We're waiting on confirmation of that coming through from the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. So yes, there is every likelihood that we will be revisiting this report prior to the 2-year deadline.
Okay, well, I think that's been useful, and I think in terms of the recommendations, we definitely have done number one, discussing the content of the report. I think that's been very helpful, so thank you. Just taking on board, you know, that need to be compliant and the time scale. I think I've been hearing, you know, that everybody accepts that we require to have this report, but also that there is a lot of room for addition, consultation, discussion around the report sooner rather than later. And Morgan and George, you've been saying that is likely to be next year rather than, you know, 2 years' time. So are you happy with that, Lois? Because I know you had expressed a particular opinion in terms of where it's lacking.
Yeah, I'm just a little bit uncomfortable and concerned by it, but I think if there was a commitment from the board to review this kind of next year and to be involved and to look to kind of tease this out further, and like I say, I think, like Elaine said, I think we need to be a little bit bolder and aspirational and really kind of live by those values in terms of equalities and demonstrate that within the main.
Can we add that then as a recommendation, Gail, in terms of that we are looking at it within a specific time scale so that it's you know, on our radar sooner rather than later? Would you be happy with that, Lois? We add that on as a recommendation and around some of the principles that you've been talking about. Okay, and other than that, in terms of the other recommendations, we are happy to approve the report, to accept the outcomes and agree to implement the action plan, and then we will add the recommendation in terms of that additional work taking place on the report sooner rather than later, with a specific date on that. Are we happy with that recommendation, everybody? Yep. Okay, well, thanks very much. We'll move on now to item 8, which is the progress report, adult support and protection capacity. George, is this you again?
It is indeed. Yep. Earning my corn today.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'm going to explain this a little bit because I think that there probably is some benefit in just explaining about the context so people understand how it works. So this report's here because in February the IGB received the Adult Protection Committee annual report for 2021, and that noted big increases in referral numbers and in demand for adult support protection interventions. And it was noted at the time that this would inevitably have an impact on services and create demand and capacity challenges or make those more pronounced, particularly in the care management teams. And I was asked to bring a report back to this IGB. So I think it's necessary to understand a little bit of how the system works. So adult support protection is a delegated function to the IGB and to its operational wing, the Health and Social Care Partnership. So that means the duty to investigate adult support and protection concerns in the Adult Support and Protection Act, which previously sat with Angus Council, sits since integration with the IGB and the partnership. All the other involved public bodies have a legal duty to cooperate in the adult support and protection process. It's actually a criminal offence not to cooperate in that process, although I can't ever remember that having been invoked. But there is a requirement on all bodies to cooperate with the investigating leads, and the lead agencies, social work, and investigations are carried out by what is called council officers. That's a definition from the Act, and they're qualified social workers and sometimes senior nurses or OTs employed by the council with appropriate training and experience. So those are the people that do the adult support and protection investigations. within the care management teams. And their task is to reduce or manage risk for adults who are the subject of serious professional concern. And that's usually determined through an investigation and then an adult protection case conference if one is required. So the care management teams are required to maintain sufficient numbers of suitably qualified council officers to manage the demand for adult protection work. So maintaining capacity in those teams becomes more challenging when there's a significant rise in the level of demand for adult support and protection work, where there are budgetary challenges, which makes it difficult to increase resources, when recruitment's problematic, or when the balance of new and experienced workers tips towards the former. If you have too many new workers, it's much harder to allocate the work. Council officers have to have at least 1 year post-qualifying experience with vulnerable adults before they can lead investigations. So new workers coming into teams cannot do that. And of course, workers don't only carry adult protection cases. We don't have a dedicated adult protection team. So the same care managers are affected by the current increases that are going on in demand for care at home work, which they organise and coordinate, and by the increases in adults with incapacity work, which we've reported at other times. So adult support and protection is not the only reason for strengthening care management teams, but a significant part of that overall increase in their workloads. I think it's worth saying a bit about risk. All adult protection work carries risk, and it's not possible to eliminate risk entirely. It never is in protection work. The intervention of involved professionals is intended to achieve a number of aims: to carry out assessment of risk where adult protection concerns are presented in individual cases or in group settings, to take the necessary action to protect vulnerable people, strategically to ensure that adult protection operating procedures are fit for purpose, that multi-agency working is robust, and that the skill set in adult support and protection for staff is well developed. We need to have very skilled and experienced people. So where you get into increased risk is where you've got insufficient resource being allocated by agencies to manage demand in adult support and protection work, where your staff are not adequately skilled or knowledgeable or experienced enough to carry out their duties in that area of work, whereas your procedures are not sufficiently well developed to promote good practice, where multi-agency working isn't well developed and promoting good practice, or where the amounts of training and the quality of training for staff isn't available at the right time. So this report, in a way, captures all of those risks, but what it's really about is ensuring that we have enough resource in those care management teams to manage the increases that we're talking about. I think one of the problems is by the time you get the adult protection annual report, it's a bit out of date. By the time it works its way through the system, and I've made a point here of quoting more recent information, which comes from the Adult Support and Protection Review Officer who submitted the annual statistical report for 21-22 to the Adult Protection Committee, and it very recently in June, and it has comparisons going back to 17-18. And I just want to pick out some of the things from that. Adult protection referrals have gone up dramatically from 406 in 2019-20 to 728 in 2021, dropped down to 681 in 21-22. But that's a 60% increase in referrals from 2 years ago. The number of adult protection inquiries increased from 282 in 17-18 to 508 in 21-22 after a high the previous year of 529. So major increases again. The number of adult protection investigations completed increased from 46 in 17-18 to 145 in 2021, then dropped back to 82 in 21-22, but 82 compared to 46 in 17-18. It's a very significant increase, and so on. I'll not go through them all. So the question is, what are we doing about it? So this is the solution is a bit unsophisticated in a way, because what we're able to do is identify where the pressure points are and where we have to increase capacity. And we've been fortunate in receiving a number of different funding streams that have allowed us to add posts into the teams at key points. And most of those, as you'll see from the list, are care management posts or support workers that support care management. And we've included things in there like additional administration staff, for example. So we've added in 24.5 full-time equivalent posts in an attempt to strengthen that, and that will work. I'm pretty confident about that. All these posts are at different stages of recruitment as we speak. So the costs for that are staggering, really. About £500,000 in the current year and £1 million recurringly thereafter for these posts. And that's probably all I want to say. And I hope that answers the questions. I have said under other implications, I think these changes are permanent. There's no sign of that going back the way and the numbers shrinking again. And that changes the balance of experience and higher level skill set we need in the care management teams. They put a lot of pressure on team managers, of course. It's not just the care management staff that are dealing with it. The team managers oversee all that work in the complex cases, and they have to manage that. There are senior practitioners in the disability services, in mental health services and in ADARs, but I think we need to think about whether we're to introduce similar posts over time into older people's services and disability services, because they do bring a certain amount of value to the work, and that they're higher skilled professionals in the teams. So I hope that covers the ask, which was to come back and see how we're getting on with this demand capacity issue, and we've outlined some of the things we're doing there. Thanks, Chair.
That's great. Thanks very much, George. I suppose I just had one question you kind of answered at the end there. The report talks about how much the rises there have been over the past number of years. And I was just going to ask, had you any sense of the extent of the future expansion in demand, and if so, these interventions in terms of recruiting extra staff are likely to be able to support that future expansion in demand? But I guess a lot of that is unknown.
Yeah, it's a bit of educated guesswork, I think. So the increasing trajectory was already pretty pronounced, and then we had a very steep acceleration in the last year, and then it kind of leveled off a bit. I think it'll just stay at that leveled off frequency, if you like. And the reason I say that is because I think the overall system is becoming much more aware of adult protection. So the referring organisations are much more aware. I think when you have significant case reviews, that introduces what would you say, an element of nervousness or anxiety amongst the professionals. So thresholds probably come down a little bit for intervention. And there's no sign of that waning, I wouldn't say. I think some of our member organisations in the system have become much more sophisticated and knowledgeable about adult protection, therefore are making a lot more referrals, and that's all to the good. And I think even some of the things that have happened during the pandemic, so for example, expectations of the standards of care in care homes and how we approach adult protection matters in relation to care homes are also leading to an increase in business. So I don't see, Emma Jane, any of those things tailing off in the foreseeable future. So I think demand is going to remain pretty high.
Thanks for that, George. Julie.
Thank you, and thanks, George. I'm really pleased to see this paper and the additional posts. I know I've spoken to you relatively recently about some capacity issues that were coming up. But going back to my previous job, I well remember, just how busy our care management teams were even then, and just how put in a good service and struggle with that at times, to be honest. So for me, the staff health and well-being aspect of this is really, really important. Because if then hopefully it reduces the pressure on others. I just wondered if you had how will be able to recruit to those posts? Is the market quite buoyant at the moment in terms of global applicants? Are we seeking for employees to maybe come back? Our recruitment, because I am concerned about available resource there. Anything on that would be helpful. Thanks. But again, the investment.
Yeah, it's probably easiest with the support staff. They're the easiest group to recruit to, so home care assessors and care coordinators and so on. It's been pretty variable with care managers or social workers for the most part. And we've had mixed results, but our timing's been quite good because we've got the university graduates coming off courses at this time of year, and we've managed to fill quite a few posts that way. The team managers, of course, say, you know, don't give me 3 new qualified workers. I need experienced workers to come into the team. And that point about balance I've made in the report. But I've also been in that position myself as a team manager and a main grade worker. And at the end of the day, you need the bodies, you need the qualified workers. And, you know, we will take newly qualified ones with all the challenges that presents, if that's what we can get. And you have to just be really pragmatic about. Now, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm criticising newly qualified workers, because my experience has been we get some great new workers and they are full of enthusiasm and dead keen. And, you know, that's a good thing to bring into teams. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. You know, we're doing okay in the recruitment. I'm not getting too worried about it, but we've a bit of a way to go.
Okay, thank you. And George?
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, George, I mean, firstly to say, obviously, I'm also very happy to see the increase in staffing to help meet demand. But when we're looking at staffing, I mean, we talked about 24.5 full-time equivalent staff. How does that compare to the baseline of staff that were there already working on this? Has that doubled? Is it 40%? Or do you have that information?
You're on mute, George.
I don't, sorry, George, off the top of my head. It's a good question to ask actually, and I would like to have a sense of the kind of percentage increase overall that is. I'll get that and I'll drop you an email if that's okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Maybe we could all get that, George, please.
Yeah, quite happy to do that. Yep. Do you know what? I thought in preparing the report of that at one point, and I thought to myself, I must get the percentage increase, and then I forgot to do it. So I will get that and get it out to people.
Thank you. Okay, and if we just move to the recommendations, which are to accept the content of the report and support the interventions undertaken or planned to address capacity challenges. Are we all happy with those? Yep. Okay, thank you. Thanks, George. I think that's you off the hook for a while now. So we're moving on to finance, and we've got agenda item 9, which is the finance report, and I'll hand over to Sandy for that one.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just pick out some of the main points from this one. And I'll say this first thing, hopefully just once, and maybe I won't have to come back to it for a couple of years. At the bottom of the first page, we just note the potential financial implications or ramifications, if you like, of the changes to the integration scheme. We obviously, shared views about that at previous IGB board meetings, but we've got to put it in our finance reports somewhere. So it's there for the record, but hopefully I won't have to come back to that for some time. The main body of the report, section 3, kind of sets out where we are in terms of a financial projection for this year. We're still relatively early in the financial year, lots of uncertainty still, but at the moment we're projecting an underspend. Now, it's not a kind of a planned underspend, it's effectively an unplanned underspend. The report alludes to the fact that we do have issues with vacancies at the moment in the system and recruitment challenges, and those are what are really driving the underspend. So it's effectively hopefully a time-limited underspend, but it is an underspend nonetheless at the moment. And that underspend that we're projecting does conflict or feels inconsistent with some of the messages inside the report, even with regard to this year. So, for example, in section 3.2, we talk about significant pressures on our out-of-hours services. In 3.4, we note the changes in the pattern of our prescribing spend. We know we've got financial burdens in general practice, which are set out at 3.5. And we actually also know that there's some uncertainty about some of the mental health funding streams. So there are uncertainties there. But those aside, at the moment, the projection for this year is one of an underspend. The report kind of in order, section 3.12 of the report, a bit further down, talks about COVID funding, and this does generate a recommendation in the report. It refers back to COVID funding we received in February of 2022 in the last financial year, one of the things that generated the big reserves that we held at the end of the financial year. We know that we need to start making decisions about those. The national guidance is not particularly strong on that front, and what we're looking for here is once the guidance is in place at a national level, which I think will be quite clear once it falls into place, to allow, we're seeking authority from the board to allow the chief officer and the chief finance officer to liaise with NHS Tayside as required to get that funding flowing into the system. So that's coming through as a recommendation. Hopefully that feels appropriate for everybody. And the final area I just want to flag up is in section 3.13 of the report, the bottom of page 114. This is where we set out where we are with our strategic financial planning. We saw the strategic financial plan in April. The IJB asked the strategic planning group to start to have a look at that. They have done that. We looked at that in the SPG strategic planning group in July, and we've taken it into one or two other forums. We're going to look at this probably in three phases. One, dealing with all the things that we've said we'd do already, which are in the table on page 115. Phase two, to try and come up with a series of ideas by December, and then phase three after December. That's hard work. Those savings are big challenges, £3 million plus to be delivered on plans we already have, and another 6 million beyond that. That equates to roughly 5% of the IJB's turnover. And that's against all those aspirations we've spoken about in the last hour. So it's hard work, and we'll need to see things come to the IJB, concrete things, concrete decisions that will allow us to turn that around. So that's a job of the SPG and the management teams to get those in front of the IJB, and obviously a difficult job for the IJB to consider. The only other thing I want to say, and it's in the context of the strategic financial plan, is it is worth keeping in mind. It's frankly, it's blatantly obvious. We are experiencing more financial pressures at a kind of a high level than we probably have for a number of years. The inflationary pressures that are real are going to have a ripple effect into the way we plan our finances. And the pressures at a government level will have a ripple effect on the funding that kind of eventually comes down to the public sector as a whole, but obviously the IJB in the context of our plans. So those pressures are probably bigger than when we wrote drafted the financial plan and signed it off in April. So, I mean, I think everybody kind of knows that, but I just want to kind of note it in the meeting in the context of what we're set out. So, Chair, that's the main points I just wanted to flag up, but obviously happy as ever to take any questions on it.
Great, thanks very much, Sandy. Very thorough report as always, and some of the verbal updates that you've given as well, very helpful. Questions for Sandy? Peter.
Well, thank you, Emma-Jane. Sandy, as ever, that's a comprehensive report and reflects a fundamentally sound situation. And I congratulate you on your financial husbandry. At the same time, the NHS is really struggling now. I don't know if you know, you'd probably speak to Stuart, but our finances in the NHS have taken a distinct downturn. So my question is, how can you help? Looking at the whole system, across the partnership, how can you help? And I'm thinking like dragging people through the system so as to release pressure on delayed discharges. I'm thinking about the enormous overspend on mental health. How can you help the whole system?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Peter. Yeah, and we're aware that we work into with two partners that both have their financial every pressure you'll hear in NHS Tayside circles. There'll be one mirrored in Angus Council as well. Our pressures, they're set out in our financial plan and they build up rapidly over a 3-year period. So we're all experiencing pressure. So I'll answer part of that question initially from, I suppose, my professional perspective, and others, maybe Gail or others, might want to chip in with regarding things like delayed discharges or things like that. Certainly, one of the recommendations on here today, in fact, the specific recommendation about looking at some of our COVID reserves is designed to get something moving. And I mentioned that some of the national guidance had been a wee bit lacking, hadn't kind of come through particularly quickly. So that reserve that I was talking about, the £11 million reserve, came to us in February. We're talking about it in August, and the national guidance is still not clear. So we're trying to put in place what we can to allow that funding to flow through into the system. It will flow through, and I'm just wanting to give us the mechanism or the vehicle to allow that to happen with as much certainty as quickly as we possibly can. So small things like that. In the past, we have sometimes looked at our reserves position and kind of taken into account the way our partners are working. That's something that we might bring back to the board at some point in the future. Those are both examples of financial things where we would try to take into account the impact of both partners, because we are working with both. There are, of course, other things, and you mentioned the kind of pull through of patients and delayed discharges. I think I might bring Gail in here if that's not unfair of me to do that, and Gail might want to just describe one or two things that we're doing around that. But Peter, if there's something more you want to ask me on what I've just said, just come back to me in a second. That would be fine.
Okay.
Gail, did you want to come in at this point?
Yes, I can, Peter. In relation to delayed discharges particularly, we do an immense amount of work in Angus. In fact, more recently on Monday, we provided a report to the executive team in NHS Tayside that I'm happy to share with yourselves about the additional work that we are doing in Angus to ensure that any Angus patients are if at all delayed in 9 wells, it's a rare occurrence. We are consistently achieving our ambition, which is to have 3 people or less in 9 wells, and I can say that the majority of the time we achieve that. And that does support the whole system. In addition, we have also taken patients out with Angus to help assist the whole system there, Peter, particularly in White Hills, which is easier access for people from Dundee and that border with Perth. Eunice McLennan is on the phone. I don't know, Eunice, if you want to provide anything else, but I will share the report with the members today. Is Eunice there?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Gail. I think the report will cover all the work that we're doing, and we're doing an extensive amount of work, including formally every week that we review all the challenging delayed discharges and frequently review all the other delayed discharges basically on a daily basis. So there's a lot of work getting done, which will be evidenced in the report.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I can say, Peter, on 2 occasions last week with no one delayed in our acute environment. So we do exceptionally well.
Thanks, Bud. Okay with that, Peter?
Yeah, that's fine, thank you. Just one general point again for Sandy. I understand that the situation of financial imbalance between the NHS and the IJBs is common right across Scotland, and Tayside is no different from anywhere else. So in that situation, is there a risk, if you like, of the Scottish Government grabbing the reserves in the IJBs to reallocate to the NHS?
Yes, there is. And we already know the Scottish Government are looking at the reserves held by IJBs, and there is already some dialogue going on about that. So right. I think, I suppose I have, oh gosh, I was about to say my personal view on that, which obviously I shouldn't do in a meeting. But I think there's an element where we have to kind of understand that we have got some reserves that have built up over time, on various Scottish Government programmes in particular. And we understand that the Scottish Government does have a pressure, it can see pressures elsewhere in the public sector. So, I think it's understandable that the Scottish Government would look at this. And I think in terms of our relationship and liaising with the Scottish Government, we just have to do what we can to make sure that any review of things like reserves is done on a considered and measured basis, that clearly doesn't destabilise plans that are happening, because that would be unfortunate. But is done on a rational and considered basis. So that's where I'm kind of at. There's definitely a risk of this happening, and it is kind of crystallising around us almost as we speak, because we are getting correspondence in from the government about that already. And it'll be they will be looking at their overall pressures, whether it's within the health department or potentially wider in the Scottish Government. So definitely a risk.
So if we are at risk of, if you like, losing our reserves, it would seem to be a good idea to sort of use them, or at least, invest in the model going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of our reserves have certain constraints associated with them. So a lot of, we haven't got it in the papers today, but we have £35 million of reserves. Can't remember the figure, but the vast majority of that is, probably about half of that is COVID reserves, which have specific characteristics associated with them. And that is what's referred to as a specific recommendation today. Oh dear, sorry. That's my phone going. My daughter's trying to get in the front door. I've got unlocked it. I'm just going to have to leave her.
I think you should go let her in, Sandy. That's a shame.
Go.
2 seconds.
Oh. We'll let him come back and answer the rest of your question. Thanks, Peter.
Dad, I've lost my key.
That was quick.
Well, it's just there, but I heard the door going, then my mobile goes, and then the house phone goes. Anyway, never mind. She's in now. So, a lot of our reserves are ring-fenced, Peter, including the COVID reserves, and that's why we've got that recommendation in to try and get those moving. Another group of reserves are ring-fenced against specific programs, for example, alcohol and drugs, the primary care programs, the mental health programs. And those, we are generally, through the individual services, developing plans for those. But we have been constrained by COVID, and we have been restrained by our ability to recruit. And it's those ones in particular where I'm quite keen that we can work with the government to make sure that any changes in the reserves are considered, but don't kind of undermine our position. But otherwise, we are trying to make sure we mobilise things as quickly as we can.
Good. Thank you, Sandy.
Okay.
Okay. Julie.
Thanks, Chair. We've got an NHS Tayside board meeting tomorrow, and I'm sure these issues will come up there in terms of stuff. But when you look at, national outcomes around mental health at 9 Wells being seen within a target of 4 hours, I just think there's so much more that you do in the community to prevent people presenting at A&E with them in the first place. And for me, that is about wraparound person-centred care where they live. In the world, that outcome wouldn't need to even exist. I think we're a bit of a way up, but that's the kind of development I think we need to see. And it's hard from figures to see when they're Tayside-wide how that affects each separate populations. So I'm not sure if we can get that data, but I'll be asking that tomorrow. But my question, and it was more for Alison than Sandy. Sandy will be delighted to hear. We were making prescribing budget reductions. We put a huge amount of effort into that, and we were seeing that pay dividends. Obviously, that slipped back a bit with COVID. I just wondered if we're in a position yet to regroup on that and to get back some lost. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to respond to that. The prescribing is a concern. We are currently about 6% above the Scottish average in terms of our spend, and that is an increase, and that is a concern, and we are monitoring it. We share your concern about it. The focus has been previously that where we were able to reduce costs around a combination of factors. Some was doing bespoke projects, and with capacity in primary care being the way it is, that has been difficult. GPs have been concentrated and pharmacists pulled into other priorities in care. There is the bit about focusing on early intervention and prevention and alternatives to pills. We have newly appointed a programme manager for early intervention and prevention. We've discussed that through the strategic planning group. And so there is a programme of work with Angus Alive that will hopefully help. But all these things require investment, and there is work ongoing to identify high risk, high cost switches in individuals, and there is variation that happens. So you're absolutely right, Councillor Bell, that is a concern. And for me, that links back to why I had my hand up after Peter was talking there, around the need to, if we are going to work well across the primary secondary care whole system, we need to think about co-production efficiencies. And there's a real risk here that we entrench into our positions of, well, we need to manage waiting lists, so next move lots into general practice. GPs saying, well, I've got all this pressure because secondary care waiting lists, I'll just have to prescribe a pill, and then that's not going to get us where we need to be. So it's really a plea about being strategic about this, concentrating on our priorities. Consider that the process we were talking about earlier around co-production with the paper earlier, and how do we get the right structures across NHS Tayside and the partnerships, perhaps with Angus Council, to get resource where it's going to be most effectively spent. And that's not just financial resource, that's workforce, because we've got highly trained individuals, but there's not enough of them to work in the old way. How do we move that forward for the future and really concentrate on our highest priorities, thinking about our risks, but prescribing absolutely person-centred care. And the point you made about why we are waiting until people get into A&E and then delayed discharges, we really need to get much earlier. Next, reduce demand on hospitals by getting it right in the community and the right models of care, and then not just all about waiting till someone's in and then focus on delayed discharge. We need to do both. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks for that, Alison. That's really helpful. Elaine.
I'll switch my camera off. It's really kind of a couple of points. One is about, absolutely, Peter, I think that the whole system working in Tayside and in Angus and Dundee and Perth and Kinross is absolutely the cutting edge. But we recognise that this winter, and that's a conversation I've had, I think, 2 or 3 times already today, is about this is the one way that we will try and keep ahead of the game, is by that reducing delayed discharges, getting people as soon as they can go home to go home. And it will be it's the only trick really we have left in our toolkit for this winter, is trying to keep flow through. We've done it well, it's how we've worked for the last 4 or 5 years, and we will commit to keep doing it. I just wanted to reflect that I think there are hidden things in the positive financial picture of the Angus IJB, and we know that our biggest spend is on workforce and is on salaries. And I've just noticed really that looking at the example of the hosted services in the Dundee IJB are now all in surplus, and that's because we just actually cannot, there are not people there who we can employ to work. So unfortunately, sometimes having a surplus is because we cannot employ people to work within services. So there is a gap, there is unmet or undelivered service. And I think that is a real concern, and it's very difficult to describe in any financial plan or any presentation. And I think we are lucky, we are very lucky that we have, you know, the one of the best financial leads in the country, leading our IJB. But the way we report isn't enough to sometimes show those gaps and how we can save money. I do share your concerns, though, that there is a mismatch between funding for health, funding for IJBs, and I don't think there's enough of that flow across. And I think it is a challenge, though, to look at some of those areas that are fiendishly difficult. And I'm going to say the words large hospital set aside again. And Sandy, I think we probably do with Gillian, and I think welcome Eunice as well coming across. There are difficult areas, large hospital set aside, truly moving services into the community. Some of those are preventative, some of those are where people want to be, and also just a sense that we are getting more and more people caught in guardianship and remaining in hospital where they do not need to be. I think that's another conversation that you and I are probably being primed to have, and just a link probably made from today. But I think we do need to be aware that funding is being put to IJBs and it's just how we can be smart and savvy about using that, because there are services that we can develop, but we just need to have some of that headspace to innovate, to do it. But I'll blow our own trumpet. I think Angus is one of the very best and richest places to do that. It's just perhaps freeing up some of the headspace and time to have those conversations, because they're tricky.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Elaine. And Alison?
Yeah, I just want to come back on one of Elaine's points. It's about having the difficult conversations about what we can move into the community, but it's just to highlight that a lot of the spend in the community is dependent on the decisions that are made in care, particularly around prescribing. And part of the tricky conversations is about that as well. How can secondary care support us so that we are able to manage our resources? It works both ways. We are very, very dependent on each other. These are really, really tricky conversations to have. And this is about change, and people sometimes don't like change, especially when our workforce is working under such incredible pressure at the moment. But I think we do need to be confident and brave around some of the conversations that need to happen. And I'm very happy to be involved in any work across interfaith. I think there's lots we can do here.
Thanks very much, and thank you very much, everybody. We always have a good input on around the finance paper, so thanks very much for that. If we've got no other comments and questions, we just move to the recommendations. I'll not read them out, but you'll see them at the start of the paper. Are we all happy with those recommendations for this paper? Yep. I'm going to propose that we take a short break just now, because we're past 3:30. And if we just come back just around about 3:45. Karen, is that all right if you arrange the pause of the broadcast?
Yeah, that's fine, Chair. John, can we please. Thanks, John.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to the IJB meeting. We are now moving on in our agenda to item 10, which is the Angus Mental Health and Wellbeing Update. I note that Gillian is on holiday at the minute, so Gail, I'm not sure who's taking this one.
I'll start that, and I think Terry Irvin should be in the meeting somewhere, I hope.
Yeah, I've got my camera on, but you maybe can't see me because there's too many people.
Oh, okay.
We can
Hi,
see you.
Terry.
Hi.
Yes, Chair, the aim of this report, I won't go over it in detail, it's quite an extensive report, but the aim is obviously to achieve the best outcome for the citizens of Angus in relation to all aspects of mental health and wellbeing. And with that, we include suicide prevention in that as well. What's outlined in the report in our current position is exactly what we're doing. And within Angus, you will see that there are many, many areas that have been progressed to enhance our service provision. And the service continues to work in partnership with all key stakeholders, including our service users and our carers, to inform the developments and the overarching plans and timescales. We've detailed a number of these below, and we've also included comments from the recent staff survey, of which we got many. Terry, do you want to take it from there?
Just want me to run through the report?
Just highlight some of the main things, Terry. I think particularly around the initial plans, the stage 1 and stage 2.
Okay, I'll quickly just go through it a little bit because it'll only take a couple of minutes. But first of all, the Living Life Well plan, that's been approved and consulted with the IJB, identifying the responsible groups for each recommendation. So we've done that. So the next step for that is for those groups to develop action plans that are very detailed and also key quality indicators and timescales. So that'll be the next step for that, which we're just undertaking at the moment. For the 7-day service, you'll be able to see there that we have done an evaluation, so there's quite a lot of information there. It's been very successful. It's been developed since May 21 and definitely beneficial for prevention of admission, maintenance of contact and care, reduced isolation and early supported discharge and crisis support. You can see on the report some comments from the staff survey and also service user feedback. And I think it's really good to highlight the service user feedback. So perfect, just what I needed at the time. Staff really flexible, really felt listened to. And so I think that's really good. And we just need to build on that now. We've got draft recommendations and we're consulting on those with the community teams at the moment. And Short Life Working Group will progress the recommendations. And key quality indicators will continue to be measured. I'll move on to what Gail was talking about, the primary care mental health and wellbeing. We've got quite a bit of money from Scottish Government for developing mental health and wellbeing in primary care. So we've got a working group, a planning group that myself and Lisa Prudhomme from Primary Care are the joint chairs of, and we're developing plans which will be fully operational by March 2026. One of the first things we did was recruit a lead officer. So Gail Forrest has got that job, and it'll be her role to really take a project management type approach, just to developing the plans and monitoring those, ensuring we've got key quality indicators at all stages so we can evaluate as well how we're doing. So initial plans have got Scottish Government, and we got a response last week that those plans, Scottish Government are happy with our plans. So our next steps really are the IJB happy. We had very short timescales to get those plans in, so there will be more consultation with stakeholders really to firm up the plans. They're quite broad at the moment. So stage 1 of our plans is really rollout of the ECS model. So the ECS model brings together mental health and wellbeing services and substance services along with primary care in a hub which can be face-to-face or virtual, folk can join as well. And it provides one referral route and no rejected referrals for mental health and a no wrong door approach, because that was a lot of the issues we get is how do you access mental health? And we're trying to make it much, much easier now with this new system. So the ECS model through the Primary Care Mental Health and Wellbeing Group, we're going to be developing that to the remaining 3 cluster groups. So at the moment, we're just identifying primary care premises. We do know that that will be a challenge. So we're looking at, if we can't get primary care premises, where else can we go? But ideally, it would be in primary care. So that work's ongoing for that at the moment. Stage 2 then is much more ambitious. It's about developing a crisis centre, which will be open 24/7 and offering a compassionate response to distress. So what we really want is a calm, homely environment, which is a place of safety and is trauma-informed. We've been to visit the Nuke in Perth, which is a really, really brilliant service. And we're also learning from Dundee, who are currently commissioning for this kind of service. So hopefully we can learn from them and not have to repeat lots of the work they've done. So we've got a meeting coming up with Dundee to look at their plans. Along this service, people could self-refer, GPs, police, other services can refer people to, also ambulance can bring people if required. The centre will have access to overnight accommodation, and access will be available for people across Angus. So although we've got one centre, because it's too difficult to provide a really comprehensive service in 4 areas, we'll have one centre, but we're looking at ways to get folk into that centre, so we'll have a budget for taxis. And in Nuke, what they've done is they've trained the taxi drivers for one company, so the taxi driver collects the person and escorts them to the door, and are very trauma-informed and sensitive in that approach. But we'll also have within that hub distress brief intervention workers, and they will have the ability to do outreach across Angus as well. So though we'll have one centre, we've also got outreach within that. We'll also be utilising technology as well, because if people need professional mental health assessment, if there is a requirement, say for admission to hospital overnight, then there will be access to the cash view for that professional assessment. Alongside the crisis centre, we do want to deliver some services within each locality. So that will be about looking at community buildings and co-locating with other services to promote this access to all the community assets and promote social prescribing, improve pathways of support, and remove some demand from lower levels of mental health and wellbeing intervention from GP services as well. A lot of people would much prefer to go in a community building rather than into GP, so it offers that much more wider choice. I want to be really paired and flexible. We're also looking at adding new roles which add to value, but I must say we're at the very, very beginning of this planning, but we have put into our equation that we might require to enhance or support the social prescribing role, link worker role, and look at different roles as well within that. But like I say, we're at a very early stage, so anybody who wants to be involved or provide their feedback, that'd be really helpful. But really keen to get feedback. I don't know if you want to take questions of that just now. I know there's a hand up, a couple of hands up.
Yep, we've got some hands up. Thanks very much for that, Terry. So I'll just go with by the order that they went up. Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Emma Jane. This is a good report. Thanks for that, Terry. I really like it. Can I take you back to page 125 to the primary care, particularly stage 2, with your very ambitious plan for the crisis centre? Again, I think this is really good. Is this going to be available to people suffering from domestic abuse who've reached the end of their mental tether, as it were? And if so, how are you going to ensure that you have the right skill sets to handle that? And the third part of the question is, how is that going to interact with adult care and support that Georgia was talking about earlier today? So three layers question there.
Yeah, so I suppose that'll be all in the planning. So we have got the group together, and it's got people from all the areas that need to be in there for adult protection, for that have got knowledge of domestic abuse. We've got children and young people too. It's going to be really complex. So a lot of time is going to have to be spent looking at the correct environment, but also the correct staffing. So I can't say at this point in time, well, this is the staff that we're going to have in that centre, but certainly we'll look at the distress brief intervention workers. They could work with anyone who's in distress. It doesn't have to be a mental health need. It's someone in distress. We're really medicalising a lot of people because we are missing that little step of the pathway. So a lot of the people in crisis end up at Carshview looking for a mental health assessment, but they don't have a mental health disorder. They have distress. They need support. They need compassion. So it's about filling that gap. So yes, it would include people suffering from domestic abuse, but would link in with other services as well to ensure they went to the right place.
I was just wondering, it was an afterthought really. Some years ago, there was an initiative where people who are suffering from domestic abuse could effectively report it in a supermarket, and people in a bar, women in a bar, could report being harassed. I think the phrase was, "Is Alice in?" And I can't remember if that's it. I'm wondering if there's a trigger phrase that can be used that can ensure somebody gets protection without actually having to say, "I'm being physically or mentally abused by my spouse."
That's definitely something I've noted down, and I will take that to the meeting as well. Definitely a good idea.
Good, thanks.
Peter, thanks for that. Andrew?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Terry. It was an excellent report. It's very well delivered, very clear. It's nice to see that we're really getting to grips with the kind of rollout of the Living Life Well plan and all the associated things. Understandably, obviously, the focus is on intervention at the moment, and we're really tightening up on that. And I was particularly intrigued to see that we're employing taxi drivers to do kind of trauma-related work. That's quite innovative, and it's no reason why we can't widen the kind of scope of people that can get involved in distress brief interventions, perhaps, and things like that. My main question, it's kind of all leading up to, it's nice to have a focus on intervention, trauma, and all that sort of stuff, but can we then shift our focus to mental health prevention? Is there such an agenda envisaged in this plan, or are we really just focusing on fixing what was missing in the kind of intervention space, if you like? Really, a lot of these mental health things have been exacerbated by things like COVID and the follow-on plan after we've fixed all the cracks, that we can then move on to a prevention agenda as well, running in parallel with the intervention agenda. That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're definitely looking at prevention and self-management and early intervention and self-management initially just now. So we've got our peer workers and GP practices. So it's people getting support really quickly and not having to wait a long time for it. So we've got our peer workers, our social prescribers, we've got Penumbra in the community, and we've got like a whole raft of supports. But what you're asking for is prevention. So one of the things we're doing, and Sally Wilson's actually leading on this along with our development officer, is looking initially at barbers and having them as a point of contact. So if they feel they need some kind of support, they're going to get some training, there are going to be some cards that they can hand out, and then potentially roll it out to hairdressers, beauticians, because that's the people who are having the direct contact with people. There's also, and I won't go into this because I don't know enough about where it is just now, but definitely Alice and Clement could give more information on. There's a lot of work going on with Angus Alive as well to look at prevention agenda. So that's another thing. So we're doing prevention plus really focusing on early intervention and self-management as well. And also, Sally Wilson within her improvement and development team, they've now employed a programme manager for prevention as well, and early intervention. Sorry, Sally, just give me a little note. I'll give her a call out that she's helping out there. I would have forgotten to say that.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And Sarah?
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, Terry, for your really comprehensive report, really welcoming of the holistic approach that's taken to health and well-being of people in the Angus community. Just a couple of questions, please. My first one is current engagement with local authority, Armed Forces Champion, and also Veterans First Point services that are provided on a Pan-Tayside basis, but hosted by Dundee Health and Social Care Partnership. I couldn't see explicitly in the report the connections with those, recognising that the needs of those from our Armed Forces community have requirements around mental health and well-being in addition. And my second question is in regard to the crisis wellbeing centre. Sorry, not a question, it was just a comment, Terry, just to say that I really welcome the inclusion of this in Angus to ensure that there's equity across Tayside for our populations. Having been lucky enough to be a member on the Dundee IJB this morning, actually we did receive a report on the current status and update in regard to their wellbeing centre, and recognising that that's at tender stage now, so they're evaluating all the tenders that have come in terms of the commissioning of that centre. So as you say, a real opportunity for some shared learning on the Newick and the kind of tender process thus far for Dundee. But yeah, my question about the armed forces, please, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I don't have it in front of me, but the Living Life Well plan explicitly mentions people, veterans within that, so that we are very aware of the need to link in and provide support for that area. But I don't have any details at the moment, but that is an action to ensure that we're providing support and linking in with correct services.
Thank you. And it wasn't just veterans, but thank you, Terry. Absolutely, they absolutely would be a priority in terms of their trauma associated with service. However, of course, there are family members, and there may be those in our reserve forces who are serving as well. So it's just making sure that we're inclusive of all of those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to bring in Alison just now because I saw her hand went up, I think in relation to maybe Andrew's question. So Alison, will I bring you in just now?
Yes, it was in relation to Terry mentioned Angus Alive work, which of course I mentioned earlier, the work. We did mention, Terry, that we have recruited a programme manager, and absolutely there are evidence-based interventions for people with mental health that do not rely on medication. And if you look at the new NICE guidelines, which are obviously English, but very new with extensive evidence, then there is evidence around group exercise for mild to moderate depression, and we don't currently offer that. So there's a whole lot of opportunities around working in leisure centres to provide alternatives, options for people. And that's not to say that medication wouldn't be a good option, but we need to be offering all the evidence-based. And just, I do think that this may be an opportunity to think around how we support veterans as well with Angus Alive and leisure centres and this early intervention and prevention work. So absolutely happy to link with the relevant people around that as we get that programme of work off the ground. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Julie?
Thank you, Emma Jane. And yeah, likewise, really great to see this report, and again emphasises the importance of doing as much as we can in our community to prevent admission. And the crisis hub is exactly the kind of community development I was thinking about speaking to Peter Drury earlier around easing pressure on A&E and that inappropriate, I think, access for patients. So my first question is, can we think about third sector premises perhaps as a hub that takes people away, perhaps being stigmatised going into a health centre base, because we've got lots of resource out there, I think. And also on page 127 under the risk section, I just wondered if you could give us any update on standing decision at about the Mulberry unit and the multiple recording systems and duplication of reporting on those, please, Terry.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so for the premises, we are looking at potentially a homely environment, which could be a house or it could be a premises, but a standalone place. It was felt when we went to visit the Nuke that was really important, that it was really trauma-informed, really sensitive to people's needs, and also confidential when people were going for support. So we're kind of seeing it as a standalone type of service, but there is lots of consultation needed. And I know that there was a paper done recently, which we're awaiting the outcome of, which looked at how people want to engage in the community. And I think there might be some learning within that too. Yeah, so I hadn't actually gone through all my report. I thought there were so many hands. I thought it would be good to talk about what I've done so far, so I can carry on with the report unless there's more questions about what we've discussed up to now. And that would also cover the risks part.
I'll just bring in Gail just now because I think she probably wanted to come in perhaps in the Mulberry piece that Julie mentioned.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you, Chair. Previously, on your behalf, the Chair, Emma Jane, wrote to NHS Tayside regarding the situation about inpatient facility. Back that we had to contact Perth Ross, who, as you know, through the integration scheme, are now the lead partner for mental health services. I can confirm that the board medical director, the board director as Claire Pearce, and the 3 chief officers have met to progress a conversation around a single inpatient mental health facility. So that work has started to progress through that change through the integration scheme. Regarding the multiple recording systems, Lake Khalik, who's our Director of Digital, worked to the executive team of NHS Tayside on Monday regarding replacing the EMIS web system and the need for a system that interacts with Eclipse. That was approved on Monday, and I am now going to be the executive sponsor on behalf of Tayside with progressing that.
That's great. Thanks very much, Gail. So Terry, you were mentioning you had more to say. I know there's still some more hands up. So shall we just go ahead with the questions and see where they take us, if that's okay? Hayley.
Thanks, Chair. And yeah, just agreeing with everything else everything everyone else has said. Terry, really comprehensive report. I've not so much got a question, it's more of an addition to what some of the work that you've mentioned today. So the IGB will be aware that last year all third sector interfaces were awarded Communities Mental Health and Wellbeing monies from Scottish Government, and we were assured that there would be a year 2, albeit it's been a little bit slower than what we had hoped, but we have now just signed off our grant offer acceptance for year 2 of this funding. So I know that there was a question earlier on in regards to prevention and early intervention work, and I see that that's where some of this funding will support that prevention work, Andrew. So this is 324,000 that's initially coming to Angus. I know that last year we got a top up of over another 100,000, and that's not ruled out at this stage. So it might be that we have more funds coming to Angus just due to the success of our communities, really, and how well the uptake was. The aim is that this funding should be dispersed no later than March 2023. However, I am looking to pull together the partnership panel as quickly as possible and start getting applications live. And what this fund is focusing on is like grassroots, voluntary and community groups, looking at that mental health work at a grassroots level to help with that prevention work. So I think, Terry, absolutely. I know some of your team have been involved in that previously anyway. And I think there's an opportunity here to make sure that we're linking closely with what you guys are trying to do and what then the third sector and community groups can do at grassroots level as well. So more of an opportunity rather than a question, but I think it's a good addition, especially with what we're discussing today.
That's great. Thanks very much, Hayley. I think actually it's just worth saying at this point, myself and Vice Chair Julie and Gail, we met with the government appointed ministerial oversight group for mental health a couple of months ago and got some very useful feedback. And they highlighted that some of what was happening in Angus has very positive national impact, but particularly congratulated Angus on their partnership working with the third sector organisations. That was a particular focus for them, and it was. And thanks for that update as well, Hayley, in terms of working into next year and hopefully beyond as well. Okay, Lois?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was in relation to the crisis centre. And Terry, you'd mentioned about there's quite a significant link between mental health and physical disability and vice versa in terms of that relationship often. And there's also a great unmet need in terms of accessible transport and accessible taxis. For example, sometimes in the Arbroath area, covering Arbroath, Carnoustie, Montefief, there is no access to an accessible taxi. So I just wondered how you were going to overcome that issue.
That's something that I will take back to make sure that when we're looking at that, that there is availability of an accessible taxi. So that would be a bit of work we'd need to do. But thank you for bringing it up, because no one had brought that up before.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And I would imagine the same would be in terms of the accommodation as well, that it would obviously be accessible and take into the needs of, varying physical needs.
Okay, thanks for that, Lewis. And Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Terry, just want to echo what everyone else has said about the report. Well done. I think it demonstrates a fantastic amount of really significant work that's taking place. I think the amount of work taking place in Angus across NHS Tayside as a whole is wonderful. I think we'll have to appreciate, however, that we're still not the best source of help for some people. I welcome some of the discussions already around the third sector. I am going to declare an interest at this minute in time because I am Chief Executive of a charity. This particular area is really close to my heart. And I think if you look at suicide being the biggest killer of men under the age of 50, whether people on the screen like football or loathe football, I'll go there and talk about this briefly. It's a powerful tool. And I think the work of some of the football clubs and the charitable arms across the country is Scotland's best kept secret. And even in Angus, we've got myself at Montrose, Arbroath, Forfar, Brecon now, who have charitable trusts who are all looking to use the context, the power of that sport to change lives, and in particular mental health. And I've got a list of 17 testimonials in front of me now. From one gentleman in particular says, I was offered all of the help possible from NHS Tayside, my doctor, blah, blah, blah. But if it had not been for this programme, I don't think I'd be here today. Now, we received £10,000 from the PHP Community Innovation Fund, so the private health properties, just as a test for change. So we're currently delivering a programme called The Changing Room and another one called Team Talk. And I know Arbroath, Brecon and Forfar will want to do similar. So I feel that I'd be happy to sit down with you, Terry. Haley's obviously here representing the third sector. I think I would probably be slightly better versed in what's happening in the football third sector at the minute in time. So possibly a meeting between the three of us just to let you know what's currently happening in that field right now, because there's a lot of fantastic, significant work taking place. And I think it's our role as an IGB to try and empower this type of work and support it as best we possibly can. So I'd be delighted to share some details of some of that work in due course.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant, thank you. We've got Gail Forrest, we've just taken her on, so she's going to be leading on suicide prevention, along with the development officer. Our previous development officer moved on. We've got a new person starting in the next couple of weeks, and I know Penumbra has been supportive of the football clubs coming along sometimes with leaflets, so definitely building on that is brilliant, because we want to take our support to people rather than saying, you come to us, you do it the way we want you to. We want to be really flexible and innovative in Angus and just continue to develop. So yeah, really excited to have a meeting, and including Gail as well.
Okay, thanks very much. And thanks very much, Peter. That's a really, really helpful addition there. Thank you. Okay, well, if that's all of our questions and comments, we'll move to the recommendations in the paper. And it was just to highlight on the fourth recommendation here, approves the proposals for mental health in primary care funding. We're proposing, in addition to that recommendation, which states approves the proposals for mental health in primary care funding as outlined in the report and associated direction, because you'll see there is a direction attached to this report, and the direction is IJB 4/22. So that was just to highlight in particular within the recommendations that there is a direction to this report. So on that basis, are we all happy with those recommendations? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks very much, Terry and Gail as well.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on now to number 11, agenda item 11, which is partnership working. And again, I think this was one that had Gillian's name down, but she's obviously not here. So I don't know, Gail, if you want to say a bit about it or...
Yes, I'll take the report, Chair. There's only one recommendation in there because the detail is all provided in Appendix 1. It's the intention to provide the IGB with an annual update really of the status of the main groups that we have in place that do fulfil a governance role but are not under the direct management of the Health and Social Care Partnership. This information is generally available separately. You can see a number of you may also be members of the groups as well. So it's really just to ensure that the IGB are cited on the breadth of work that's been undertaken. Don't know if anybody's got any additional points.
Any questions or comments? I think it's a helpful paper in terms of the breadth of organisations that are involved in. Any comments or questions on this list? No. So
if there are any additional groups, Chair, that anybody would like included, please get in touch with me as well.
Okay, so a recommendation is to accept the contents of this report and Appendix 1. So are we all happy with that one? Yep. Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to agenda item 12, which is the Angus IGB Audit Committee Annual Report 21-22. Sandy, is this your one?
Yeah, yes, Chair, I'll quickly introduce this. So the report kind of hopefully does what it says in the tin. It is our annual report from the Audit Committee to the IGB, sets out the breadth of what we've done, what we've considered in our agendas. Obviously, there's references to our remit in this report, and of course, we've refreshed that remit earlier on today. So I think that's just a quick summary. It's all in there, Chair. I think important to kind of maybe thank Julie for 4 years of chairing the IGB's Audit Committee, which has recently come to an end. Thank Andrew for standing in. All the Audit Committee members, because it is an additional commitment on the days of IGB meetings. And of course, through the Audit Committee, we are reliant on the input of our internal and external auditors and democratic services to support them. So that has all contributed to the work that the Audit Committee has done in the last year.
Thanks very much, and absolutely echo that. Thanks to the members of the Audit Committee and those that support it as well. Anybody have any comments or questions on this report? Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to thank Sandy and the officers and our internal and external auditors for supporting the Audit Committee team, particularly the Chair. And I know that is fantastic support, and it's a very open and transparent working arrangement, I think, that we've got. I think that's to the benefit of the Audit Committee, and it's just hugely grateful to Sandy as the Chief Finance Officer for his hard work and commitment to the role. We're very fortunate, and thank you.
Absolutely, thanks, Julie. And Andrew.
Thanks, Jerry. I just echo what Julie said there. We had our meeting, a private meeting with the external and internal auditors this morning, and they had some very nice things to say about the way the IGB Audit Committee has been conducted over the last 4 years. So all credit to Julie for that, and I hope I can carry on her good work. But certainly they came up with a lot of suggestions and challenges as well. But the main message we got was very supportive and very encouraging. So I'd just like to feed that into the IGB.
Thank you, Andrew. And Peter?
Yeah, I'd just like to echo both Sandy and Andrew's comments about Julie. And I would like to formally second what has been said, so we have that minuted.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Peter. We'll make sure that's done.
I'm blushing.
Okay. If we move to the recommendations to approve the annual report of the Audit Committee and to acknowledge the input provided to the Audit Committee from the Audit Committee members and those supporting the committee. So are we happy with those recommendations? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you, Sandy. So we move to item 13 on our agenda now, which is the Angus Alcohol and Drugs Partnership update. Gail?
I had hoped Peter Macaulay had joined the meeting, but I can't see him on the screen. Oh, George is there. Peter's been off at the moment. George, are you taking
Yes, I said I would deal with it. Gail, quite happy to talk to it. Well, within the limits of my knowledge. Chair and members, Jill's on holiday. It was her report, and Peter Macaulay, the service leader for drug and alcohol services, was going to come. Unfortunately, he had a bereavement, and he's at the funeral this afternoon. So I'm afraid you've got me. I'm not a member of the ADP, although I did chair it in the past many years ago, so the subject matter is not entirely unfamiliar, but I'm a bit rusty, so bear with me. We've got Laura Ogilvie, who's planning officer for the ADP, on the call as well, so I'm sure she'll be able to support me in answering any questions. So I think there's three bits to the report that I would draw to people's attention. The first of those is a bit of an analysis of the drugs death information, and in an Angus context, and the introduction of the medication-assisted treatment standards. The second thing is a reference to the ADP annual report for 21-22, which is attached. And the third is just to highlight an increasing role for IJBs in overseeing the alcohol and drug partnerships, which I think is a new thing. And indeed, that's reflected in one of the recommendations here today. So there's an increased expectation of IJBs overseeing ADPs and bringing them, if you like, into the body of the Kirk in the IJB. So just looking at the report, there's a bit of a description about what the ADP does. And then over onto the second page, there's some detail there about the drugs death stats for Angus. Distressing reading, I think, would be fair to say. I was interested in the gender difference. 70% of the drugs deaths were being male in Scotland and 30% female. I don't know what that denotes, but I just thought it was quite striking as a statistic. No surprises, the majority of drug misuse deaths involve multiple substances and not single substance use. And halfway down the page, you can see the introduction of the MAT standards and the drive for them to help to reduce deaths and other harms and to promote recovery. These standards define what is needed for consistent delivery of safe and accessible drug treatment and support in Scotland. And there was a commitment made in the Scottish Parliament that these MAT standards would be fully embedded across the country by April 2022. You can see they're in two phases. The first phase, which is standards 1 to 5, are for 2022 to 23, and then a further 5 standards between 2023 and 2025. So the ADP has continued to work to deliver this national policy and direct it at a local level. And at the top of the next phase, you can see some data relating to the drug situation again in Angus and the people who are coming for treatment and so on. The report then goes on to have a look at the MAT standards themselves, and particularly in detail in phase 1, which is 1 to 5 of the standards. You can see, probably it jumps out very clearly, that the first of those standards is the one where performance is a bit behind where we'd like it to be. I think there's some reassurance provided in the report that it's expected to pick up when the test of change is rolled out across the area. That would certainly be monitored. Moving on to this, the last page, but one, sorry folks, I don't have I'm looking at a printed off annotated version and I don't have the same page number. So with this section that talks about whole family approach, these are just other drivers that the government is seeking to take forward, so that there's a real family focus, because obviously the impact of drug and alcohol use is a whole family issue. So there are a number of requirements and developments there. As ever, there are workforce challenges, and Jill's introduced in the report here some tensions between the expectations in the MAT standard and service delivery, and some of the challenges that are going to be in there regarding capacity, so medical and prescribing capacity, nurse and social care capacity, and there are also issues of training to support staff to deliver the MAT standards. Finally, just a word about the supports to the ADP. There's now a full-time lead officer since March of this year to support the ADP, and that'll have some person will have capacity to consider the structure and the work of the ADP and to review that. And as I said earlier, the annual report for 21-22 is attached. That was submitted to the Scottish Government as a draft on 5th of August until the IGB have had a chance to look at it. There's a small section there on funding, and a note that full funding from the Scottish Government for the plan to meet the Angus MAT plan hasn't been supported, with only 35% of the budget received or confirmed in June 2022. And it's proposed that the Angus ADP utilise some underspends from other ADP funding streams to support MAT standards 1 to 5 for the next few years. That sounds to me that it is a bit of a risk in terms of unpredictability of funding, and indeed that's picked up in the risk section of the report. Thanks, Chair. That's just a rapid summary from a not particularly well-informed perspective, but I'll do my best, or likewise Laura, to answer any questions.
Great, thanks very much, George. Okay, got a few questions. Julie?
Thank you. I was going to ask Peter this. I might just have to take it offline with Peter, George. I'm happy to do that. But first of all, I think, you know, Lois and I both sit on the ADP, and I think it's really helpful to have that connection with it. It was a bit of a free-floating entity for a while, and I think one of the things that we were able to do was get that reporting line into place with the IGB, which I think is really helpful, and they now also report to scrutiny and audit at the council, which is also a good connection. And we have a note in the report, there was a specific mention of public health data analysts. We have astonishingly talented data analysts in public health in Tayside, and Russell Goldsmith in particular, who supports the ADP, is fantastic. And you know, going years back, I think way beyond your tenure on it, George, we've had really good partnership working around our alcohol and drug services in Angus, and I think that has really well served us. So I have a huge degree of confidence that people are committed to working together. That's based on decades of experience. My question specifically is around the connection with public health and our civic licensing mechanisms. I'm not terribly sure that they're as strong as they could be, and I think we do have some issues in some places around over provision. Although that isn't reflected in the report. I think George Meekin is on civic licensing, so that might be a conversation we can have offline around that as well. But I would really like to bottom that out a wee bit, if that's all right.
George, do you want to just come in on that?
Have any information about it? I've heard it discussed in various settings in the past, and I think it possibly is an issue. I think Catherine's got her hand up.
Yeah, I was meaning Councillor Meekin to come in because
Sorry,
other George, yeah.
Well, I'm fairly new to the licensing committee. However, according to the committee and the latest provision in Angus, not only is there no over provision, and again, I mean, this isn't me, obviously, that I'm coming into this, we're not anywhere near over provision. Now, whether I agree with that or not is a different thing, but that's the fact at the moment. Could I make a comment while I'm in?
Yep.
It's just that on the delivery progress report, I think it's near the end, 1.7. The statement is all license applications are received by public health and reviewed. Advice is offered as appropriate, but there are no over licensing board in its over provision policy. Therefore, public health objections and comments are rarely provided. I think it's not only about over provision as such, because as I've already said, Angus decided there's no over provision. It's also about licensing hours. Licensing hours are tending to grow, and there's many public houses now open to 2 o'clock. And I think we have to watch that part, that if you're going to open longer, then you're going to get arguably more alcohol consumption. So it's not only, I think we shouldn't only concentrate on over provision, but we should also on licensing hours. Thank you.
Thanks for that, George. That's helpful. Elaine?
I was just reflecting, my eye was really drawn to the MAT standards and really looking that for the first one, MAT one about submission, actually being able to get treatment on the day of referral, that at 3% of green seems very low and almost, it seems quite a binary thing. You can either access treatment or you can't. So I was actually drawn to how can we have a amber on track, but I suppose it's reflecting these are actually quite early within the reporting of these standards. Is that probably a fair thought, George? And actually, as a whole nation, we are not anywhere near delivering, this very kind of rapid and I suppose at the point of need service. So I suppose it's just the numbers actually look pretty grim. But this is probably early days of reporting, and is this the first cycle of reporting and benchmarking that we've done? It's only been done this summer.
I don't know, to be honest, Elaine, but like you, I thought it probably is early days.
So
can I just come in? Yeah, this is the first benchmarking we've done, okay. And quite a lot of the sort of the actions and points within them require us to have the systems in place to capture that data, and we've never been asked to capture it before, so we don't have data easily that can be extracted. So although for some of the points it doesn't look like we're meeting the target, we could be, it's just that our systems aren't completely there yet. So a lot of our sort of implementation plan will be focused on how we build those systems into place so that we can evidence what we're doing in terms of quality and quantity.
That's helpful, thank you.
Thanks, Lara.
Okay, and Catherine?
Yeah, thank you. And I was particularly interested in the drug-related death annual report as well, which was obviously included through the link. What strikes me is that it appears, to somebody who's fairly fresh to reading those reports, it appears that there is a cohort, an ageing cohort, who are at considerable additional risk of premature death. And I'm wondering, these are individuals who are likely to have been in and out of services for a number of years. And I'm wondering whether or not we are looking at sufficiently differentiated approaches to supporting those individuals. Are we sticky enough in the support that we provide? Are we flexible enough in terms of following up if there's non-attendance? This is a group of individuals whose lives are likely to be highly chaotic. And I'm wondering the extent to which we perhaps need to develop some of those kind of bespoke approaches, and whether or not we are upfront with those individuals that they are in the category, that we would class as the highest risk of a fatal overdose or death by misadventure, even perhaps. And really just an opportunity to plug the positive work that the Glen Clover project does in this space as well, which is not hosted by the Health and Social Care Partnership, but is funded and supported through the Health and Social Care Partnership and the ADP itself. And whilst that's still a pilot project, there is ongoing evaluation work that I think will probably help in this space too. So those are comments from me, I suppose, as much as questions that need to be answered today. I think it's probably for wider reflection. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that input, Catherine. Alison.
To quickly come back on the delay in starting medically assisted treatment, that arises where the person that's assessing the patient doesn't have the ability to prescribe. So we are training advanced nurse practitioners within the alcohol and drugs service. We are very fortunate to just have recruited a new consultant, which will greatly help our manpower following the leaving of a previous consultant. So along with manpower, the other issue is around premises. So we need to think around the premises for delivery of healthcare, and they are competing with GP surgeries. So we are aware of the delays there, and one of the other delays is around the prescribing in general practice of medically assisted treatment, and historically in Tayside we haven't provided that in general practice for some time, which is different to other areas. So we are looking at an approach where we have GP surgeries and the services working much more closely together, but that takes a while to facilitate. But there's strong support from the clinical body in Angus that this is the right thing to do, work in an integrated way with the service between general practice. It's just taking a wee bit of time to make sure that we think around our ECS models. We heard around ECS and the links being rolled out, that we don't lose what's working really well, and some of the work that is going on is really good, and that we work together, and recognising that a lot of people with drug misuse are getting older. So it's about how we support their comorbidities and recognise that drug deaths might occur because with the same amount of drugs it doesn't take as much to cause significant harm, and really recognising the change in demographic there. So strong desire to work together there from the clinical community, and we're hoping to make sure that we don't go too fast and just do any harm, but a lot of positive green shoots.
Great, thanks very much, Alison. And George?
Yeah, it was just to comment on what Catherine said and what Alison was saying. I think there's quite a lot of risk profiling of the group that goes on, and you know, there's really a big factor is unmet physical health conditions that have been exacerbated by years of substance misuse. It's quite a vulnerable group physically to becoming unwell. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, George. And Laura?
Thank you. Yeah, just to pick up on Catherine's point around sort of the stickability and making sure that we're reaching people that need our services. We've done a huge amount over the last couple of years, and I suppose one of the good things that's come from COVID is just how closely our services work together. We've got a non-fatal overdose pathway that picks up people, it meets twice a week, and it picks up people who have had a near fatal overdose, so that services can get in, taking an assertive outreach approach to reach these people and get them into services or re-engage them, or figure out a plan for them, as well as sort of funding mobile phones. We've got different levels of services that are work in an integrated way. We have a hub where every referral is discussed between the services, and we can figure out which service is the best service at that time. We've expanded our peer workers, so they're that in that position that they're able to go out and speak to some of the people who've traditionally not wanted to engage in services. So just to reassure you that there is a lot of work going on in that area.
Okay, thanks for that, Laura. And George, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just to add that we're working up a draft guidance for hard to engage service users, and I read that this morning. So in fact, it's coming towards completion. So that will include this group.
Great, thanks. And Lewis?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was just picking up again on what Catherine and George has just touched on there, just at our meeting last week, when we were looking at the kind of the numbers in terms of referrals and responses, but also those that had disengaged from the service. I did ask, although it was a fairly small number. It was just asking that question around, do we follow up as to why they're disengaging, and just, I guess, wanting to make sure that they aren't, in fact, people who actually need the service most, and that, in that high risk tariff that's been described. So I think there was commitment and assurances that was going to continue to look to follow up to see just what's going on behind that.
Thanks for that, Lois. So if we don't have any more comments, or if we just move to the recommendations, I'm not going to read them all out, but you'll see them all there, including the second one, which is about a further report coming back to the IJB on progress against the MAT standards in April 2023. So are we all happy with those recommendations? Yep. Okay. That's great. So we'll just move on to item 14 now, which is the date of our next meeting, which is Wednesday, the 26th of October. And I'll just say at this point that this is my last meeting as the Angus IJB chair. The chair rotates to Angus Council for the October meeting. So I just wanted to have the opportunity to say that what an honour it's been to serve as the IJB chair for the past 2 years. I joined just 6 months into the pandemic and was really blown away by the way that the whole HSCP team, working with their partners, navigated their way through that crisis. Gail and all of the officers of the HSCP kept me right on many occasions, but you've all shown such dedication and compassion, innovation and inspiration over the past couple of years that I've seen, especially during the COVID pandemic. A huge thank you to Karen Malley for all her support, and to Lewis, and before that David Thompson from the Legal and Democratic Services team. They've been a huge source of support for me as chair, and to all of my IJB members as well. Thank you for your support of me as chair, and to your support for the executive team over the past few years as well, which have been difficult. I'll be leaving the NHS Tayside board at the end of October, so the next IJB meeting will be my last meeting, but I wish you all the very best for the future, and I look forward to seeing you in October anyway. So thank you. Gail, see your hand's gone up.
You've stolen my thunder there. I was going to beat you to it. Emma-Jane, I would like to thank you, not only just for your chairmanship, but also for your support, your encouragement, your continual motivation throughout this last 2 years of the pandemic. That has been unstinted. You have supported me all the way through, and I couldn't have done it without you.
Oh, thank you, Gail. Thank you. And Julie?
Yeah, I want to thank you for your role as chair. I mean, I think it's relatively recently that we actually met for the first time, but it didn't really feel like that, because we've had, very open conversations during the course of the IJB meetings, and I thought, no, we did meet before that. We've gone down a COVID wormhole on the time front, but you're leaving the role, leaving the IJB in really good health, and I think it's a thriving IJB, and I know we're going to be going into reorganisation with the National Care Service. And we're kicking off from a really good platform. So thank you for all of that, and for your support of our officers during that period. And I'm glad you're going to be at the October meeting. It'll be lovely to see you. Thanks for that confirmation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. Look forward to seeing you in October.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma-Jane. Well done.
Thank you.
Bye.